Dear President Trump, listen very carefully. Greenland have been part of the Danish kingdom for 800 years. It's an integrated part of our country. It is not for sale. Let me put it in words you might understand. Mr. Trump, f*** off.
Greenland isn't just ice, it's geopolitics, minerals, and diplomacy, all frozen into one power play. As President Trump once again pushes to gain control of the world's largest island.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Canada quietly secured a game-changing $3 billion mining partnership. What's behind Trump's Greenland obsession? Why did Europe push back? And how did Canada manage to cut the US out of the deal? Stay tuned. This is the Arctic Showdown, reshaping alliances, resources, and how global power really gets made. In 2019, Donald Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland, a suggestion that sparked international mockery and prompted Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, to call it absurd. Trump canceled a planned visit in retaliation. Most assumed that was the end of it. But after his 2024 re-election, Trump didn't just revisit the idea, he made it a central piece of his foreign policy platform. In early 2025, he declared that Greenland was critical to America's future and could not remain under foreign control. No longer positioning it as a business deal, Trump began calling for strategic control of Greenland through economic pressure, military leverage, and diplomatic coercion. This time, he wasn't testing public reaction, he was issuing policy. The White House instructed national security teams to revisit Cold War-era Arctic plans, and Trump began pushing for congressional funding to expand military infrastructure in the North. The message was clear. Greenland wasn't just a purchase target, it was a national security objective. And as Trump escalated his claims, the world started looking closer at what was really buried beneath Greenland's ice. Greenland may look like an icy wasteland, but underneath its glaciers lie untapped resources that are now vital to global industries. According to geological surveys, the island holds more than 38 billion tons of rare earth minerals like molybdenum, graphite, and zirconium, materials essential for manufacturing semiconductors, electric vehicles, wind turbines, and advanced weapon systems. As nations race to secure clean energy supply chains, these resources have become as strategic as oil once was. But it's not just about minerals. Greenland's location makes it one of the most valuable strategic territories on Earth. Sitting between North America and Europe, it's a critical link in Arctic radar coverage and missile defense. The island's position allows for early detection of Russian or Chinese movements in the North Atlantic and Arctic Ocean, especially as those waters become more navigable due to climate change. That's why the US maintains its Thule Air Base there, which has operated since the Cold War. So when Trump revived his push for control, it wasn't just about owning land. It was about securing what lies beneath it and guarding what passes above. By March 2025, Trump had dropped all diplomatic pretenses. Instead of talking cooperation, he turned to pressure. Behind closed doors, US officials began pushing Denmark to loosen its grip on Greenland. The president publicly declared that Greenland's resources and geography were too important to be left in what he called inflexible European hands. Vice President J.D. Vance's high-profile visit to Greenland only fueled tensions, with local leaders describing the trip as thinly veiled coercion. At the same time, Trump urged Congress to approve military and industrial investments tied directly to Greenland. He called for new Arctic bases, expanded missile defense, and resource extraction partnerships, all under U.S. control. This sparked alarm in Copenhagen. Denmark's foreign ministry accused the U.S. of treating an autonomous population like a pawn. Greenlanders, who have long fought for more independence, saw this as a direct assault on their self-governance. The approach backfired. European allies began closing ranks. Trump's insistence on dominance had opened a new front in Arctic politics, and the resistance was about to begin in full force. As Trump turned up the pressure, Denmark and Greenland responded with an unusually unified front. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen flatly rejected the idea of ceding any control, calling Trump's push a breach of trust among allies. She took the issue directly to NATO, framing it not as a negotiation, but as a threat to alliance stability. NATO leadership agreed. By late January 2025, the alliance issued a formal statement. Any attempt to coerce Greenland would be seen as undermining NATO unity. Meanwhile, Greenland's leaders didn't stay silent. The island's parliament, for the first time in its modern history, united across all major parties. Lawmakers passed a resolution outright rejecting any form of U.S. influence over Greenlandic territory, resources, or lawmaking. At the same time, they reached out to European allies to strengthen diplomatic and economic ties. NATO didn't just talk, it acted. Increased Arctic exercises and naval deployments began in the waters around Greenland. Trump's strategy had turned a distant territory into a frontline issue, and what started as a power play quickly transformed into a full-scale diplomatic standoff. Greenland didn't just reject Trump's ambitions, it used the moment to redefine its role on the world stage. In early 2025, Greenland's parliament passed a sweeping package of legislation aimed at protecting national interests. Foreign mining companies were now required to hire local workers. Profits from natural resource extraction would flow into a newly created sovereign wealth fund, modeled in part on Norway's. And any investor, no matter how powerful, had to comply with Greenland's environmental laws. This wasn't symbolic. These laws effectively shifted control of Greenland's future out of foreign boardrooms and into local hands. The message was simple. Greenland is not a passive territory. It's a rising Arctic power. Backed by strong public support, local leaders began speaking directly to the international press, making clear that they would no longer be a bargaining chip in great power rivalries. These moves signaled the start of a new political era. Greenland was still tied to Denmark, but it was operating with a voice of its own. And as the US kept pushing, a different partner had already started working quietly behind the scenes. While the US blustered and bullied, Canada made its move, quietly and effectively. Starting in late 2024, Canadian firms began forming long-term mining partnerships with Greenland, fully backed by both the EU and the Greenlandic government. By spring 2025, Canada had locked in over $3 billion in investment deals. The biggest among them, a 30-year license granted to Greenland Resources Inc., which is now developing molybdenum reserves essential for high-grade steel production. That output will be shipped directly to Europe, not North America. Another Canadian firm, Almarock Minerals, secured a $60 million financing deal to restart stalled gold, silver, and copper projects. The funding came from a mix of Danish and Norwegian state funds, and even some private American capital, unknowingly supporting a deal their own government failed to secure. What made Canada successful wasn't just the money, it was the trust. These deals were built through quiet diplomacy, respect for Greenland's autonomy, and long-term collaboration. By the time Washington realized what was happening, the contracts were signed and the minerals were already en route to Europe. Back in Washington, the fallout was immediate. U.S. defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, which depend heavily on rare earth minerals, were caught off guard. Projects tied to weapon systems, satellites, and aerospace components began facing delays due to tightening supply chains. Even the clean tech industry, bolstered by Biden-era laws like the Inflation Reduction Act, felt the squeeze. The legislation had required critical minerals to come from domestic or allied sources, and Greenland had once looked like the perfect fit. But now, with Greenland's output flowing to Europe, American firms were forced to scramble for alternatives, often at higher cost and from more geopolitically unstable suppliers. The ripple effects reached Capitol Hill. Lawmakers from both parties voiced concern. Republicans from Alaska and Maine warned that Trump's hardline stance had alienated key Arctic partners. Democrats proposed a new Arctic engagement strategy, one that would rebuild trust with Greenland and Denmark. Yet, it was too late. Greenland had passed new regulations, sealed long-term deals, and shifted its diplomatic weight toward Europe. For many in Washington, the realization stung. America hadn't just lost a negotiation, it had lost relevance in a region it once dominated. As U.S. influence faded, Greenland was already strengthening ties elsewhere, most notably with the European Union. In May 2025, Greenland granted a key mining license to a Danish-French consortium to develop anorthosite, a rock used in solar panels and low-carbon cement. The move came with full environmental oversight and local hiring mandates, reinforcing Greenland's push for sustainable and sovereign-led development. That wasn't all. In June, the EU formally included 13 new projects in its Critical Raw Materials Act, and multiple Greenland-based operations made the list. This meant guaranteed funding, regulatory support, and long-term contracts for supply. Greenland was no longer just a location, it was now part of Europe's industrial future. Brussels praised Greenland's transparent policies and environmental focus, positioning it as a stable alternative to China or conflict-prone mining zones in Africa. For Greenland, it meant legitimacy, leverage, and a seat at the table. And while U.S. officials issued vague warnings about Arctic security, Europe was locking in mineral access with signatures, not threats. The shift was clear. Greenland wasn't drifting toward Europe, it was already there. Trump's renewed push for Greenland didn't just spark diplomatic tension, it triggered a backlash across Europe. In Denmark, public opinion turned sharply, with polls showing a steep drop in trust toward the U.S., especially among younger voters. The term colonial fantasy began trending in European media, framing Trump's actions as outdated and disrespectful. Business leaders in Copenhagen took notice. Many began shifting investments away from U.S. partnerships and toward EU-funded projects in Greenland, particularly in green energy and infrastructure. At the political level, France, Norway, and other NATO members sided openly with Denmark, reinforcing Greenland's autonomy as non-negotiable. What was once a quirky headline had become a flashpoint for broader questions about U.S. global conduct. Greenland wasn't just holding firm, it had become a symbol of sovereignty and self-determination in a changing global order. It stood its ground, secured billions in investment, and redefined its global role, through diplomacy, not dependence. Canada played the long game and won. Will America adapt its approach before it loses more allies in emerging regions? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe, like, and join the global conversation.